Hey, what's up? I want to start a series where we build cool stuff. And in this series specifically, you're watching the first episode, we're gonna build a website, like an online booking system for a restaurant. So users can pick a date, a time, and if everything is fine with the date and time they picked, like it's within the opening hours and stuff, then they can choose from the menu that we'll offer them. They can add to the cart and they can check out. And then after they check out and paid for the order, then we'll receive the order in the back end and can then, just simulate being a restaurant and taking in that order. In this video, we're gonna make the date picker and the time picker for that exact project. It's gonna be really cool. We're gonna use an NPM package that's so convenient. You'll see that in the video. And I say we dive right into it and build a date and time picker for our online website booking project. Okay, here we are, and let's get started. The thing is, guys, I'd really appreciate a comment on whether you prefer me doing this live, so live coding, including the errors I make, or if you prefer if I code this, before recording and then record the actual video. Because right now, the way I'm doing it is I originally recorded myself coding this out, but realized I did a lot of mistakes in it and it took like 1 hour around there, and that's why I wasn't sure, do you guys prefer with the arrows or without? It'd be cool if you let me know in the comment section. Alright, now let's create a folder called booking software. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. npx create t3 app at latest. That's what we need to do. There we go, and then it's going to ask us what do we want to name it, and that's going to be booking software. Now the reason we're using create t3 app is it makes setting our app or some popular NPM packages or some useful NPM packages really easy. So essentially it handles some of the boilerplate setup. We are going to be working in Typescript, and I haven't decided whether we're going to use actual auth, so for example like Google accounts and so on, or if we're just going to store the order data in the cookies. That's what we could also do. But we do want a database. So we're going to connect Prisma and TRPC, and we are going to style with Tailwind. Now we do want a repository, and no, we don't want NPM because we're going to use Yarn instead. And let's start this up, open that with code. That's going to open here on my left. And there we go. Okay, let's run yarn to install all the dependencies that we need. And then we can get started with the actual coding. First, I'm going to create a folder called components. This is where we're going to put our, components. And then here we can put something like the calendar. That's going to be the first thing that we're going to create. So as I said, in this video, we're going to create the date picker and the time picker and then save that to state. And then in the next video, we're going to get started with, which weekday, interacting with the database, like which weekdays are we open, when are the holidays. So when someone chose a date and a time from the calendar, then we're going to check, is that date valid? So is it within the opening hours? Is it within, is it on a weekend or not? And then is it on a holiday or not? And if everything is correct, then they can actually take a look at our menu. Okay, so we got this whole thing started. Let's go to the pages index and remove all of this stuff. We won't need that. Let's just have one main here. There we go. And we can also remove the prettier config because I find that too opinionated. There we go. Okay, we can also remove the query. We don't need that on the homepage. And then in here, let's render a component called calendar. That doesn't exist yet, so we're going to create it. We're going to do that inside of the calendar folder. Just have a component called, index. That's going to come from the calendar, so we can already import that. So import, there we go. And then here we're gonna need a package actually. So the package is going to be called React-calendar npm. As you can see, I've already Googled it here. This is what we're going to use. Really easy tool, very, very convenient if you're going to use something like a calendar. In my opinion, it does not make sense to do those things yourself. if there are npm packages which are, you know, battle tested and really good at serving the purpose that they're meant for. And you're going to see that here in a second. So, okay, we've installed a package, and now we can say import, let's call it React Calendar from React Calendar. Okay, and it seems we also need the types for that. So let's copy the add types and then yarn add the types as a dev dependency because we won't need those in production. That should fix the error. Let's restart the Typescript server just to speed that process up. And now we've got the React Calendar. Great. Which is what we're going to use in this component right here. So let's have the calendar, we call it React Calendar. There we go. And as you can see, there's a bunch of cool stuff in here, like min date, max date, and so on and so forth. And we're going to pass it a few properties. So minimum date is going to be new date. That means essentially we are only showing dates that are, you know, not from the past, but from today pretty much. Then the class name is going to be React-calendar. And I'm writing this in caps lock to make sure that we know this is coming from a custom CSS file later. And we're also just going to give it a bit of padding with Tailwind. The view is going to be the month. As you can see, we can select century, decade, month, or year. In our case, that's going to be month. And on click day is going to be a very useful function in which we get the date that is clicked, and let's just log that out. Console.log date whenever we click that component. All right, so let's clear the screen and then start this whole party up. So we can go to localhost 3000 and take a look at what we currently have. We currently don't have much, it seems like, because we also need to save our files. That's probably why. As you can see, all right, we've got a calendar. And when we click one of those, let me zoom in a bit, we get the date in the console because we are logging it out right here. This looks pretty bad. In this video, we're not going to get too much into this styling at all. I'm just going to copy and paste one CSS file inside the calendar. So calendar.css. This is going to be inside the GitHub repository as well. This is the code I've used in a production project I've done, which is also on my GitHub, but it might be a private repo, which is essentially just going to make our calendar look good. So we need to import that. We need to import that here. And remember, if you want to import custom CSS, you don't do that on a component basis in NextJS, but you do it right here in the app. Otherwise, you get an error. So which is going to be .. Actually, we should probably put that in styles. That's going to be better. There we go. Styles and then calendar.css. Save that. And that is going to make our calendar look good. There we go. Now we've got the dates that we can't choose, which are grayed out. Dates from the next month are, you know, kind of grayed out, but not that much. And then we've got the current dates. And whenever we click one, we are going to see it logged to the console. Great. Now, let's get started with the time selection. So you can choose a date right now, but you should also be able to choose a time, right? And the way we do that is a bit more complex. Essentially, first thing we're going to do is initialize a state for that. And in this project I've got here open on my left, so I coded this whole thing out like 2 hours ago, but with the errors it took like an hour. You know, as I said, would be really helpful if you guys commented if you want to see that or not. We're going to pass that a type, which is called date type. I just called it that, which we're going to make up here. So interface date type is going to be a just date, which is going to be a date or null. And or null because we're going to initialize it as that. And then the date time, which is going to be also a date or null. And then in here, we're going to pass the just date, initialize that as null, and the date time will also be initialized as null, because when the user hasn't chosen any, then we want it to be null, and for the value to be falsy when no date was chosen yet. Great. Okay, now the uppermost div, let's give that a class name of height screen, flex column, justify center, and then item center. As I said, we're not going to worry too much about styling, but just to make it look a bit less horrible. And then we can get into the conditional rendering, right? So essentially, let's wrap this in a conditional render. So the date dot, and we have the just date and the date time. And when the user has chosen just the date, then we want to show the time component, right? So let's just have an empty div here for now. And if the user has not chosen just the date yet, so just the date meaning clicked any of these, if the user hasn't done that, then we want to show the calendar. But obviously, if the user has clicked one of them, then we don't want to show the calendar anymore, but instead the empty div that we're going to have. So if there's a date.justDate, then we're going to conditionally render that. And then here, obviously, we're going to set the date to whatever it was previously, so an implicit object return. And then the I swear GitHub Copilot always messes this up. And then the just date is going to be the date that we've just selected. And that will mean whenever we click a date, this screen is going to clear exactly because just an empty div right here is being rendered to the screen. Okay, that div is going to have a class name of flex and gap4 just for some very basic styling. And then in here, we want to map over the times that are allowed. The thing is, how do we know which times are allowed? And that is a good question. And when we think about it, right, we want the times of, let's say we want to give a starting time and then we want to give a closing time. And we also want to give an interval, right? So let's say the shop opens at 8 and closes at, 5. And users can book in half an hour increments. How would we go about that? And the way I figured was easiest and most convenient is just to make a function for that we're going to run in the top level of this component. So const get times, let's call it. It's going to be an arrow function, and I can disable GitHub Copilot for this. And the basis for everything that we're going to do in the following is assuming that there is a date selected. So we can say date.justDate. If that doesn't exist, that's why we got this exclamation point here, then we're just going to return. And this is called a guard clause, and it allows us to assume that this exists in the following. Okay, and now we can just destructure the just date from the date. There we go. Which is of type date and not date or null, which is here because we have this guard clause. And then we can say const beginning is equal to, well, okay, so now we need to configure a date that has like 9 o'clock inside of it. And doing that in JavaScript would be quite difficult, but there are really good packages to do that. The one I love the most is called datefns on npm. Not only do I like it, it got 7.6 million weekly downloads, which is absolutely bonkers. So we can also install that. Datefns, which is way smaller than Moment.js, if you also know that. And it's just way more convenient to work with that. And it just makes working with dates a breeze, pretty much. So we can import the add function from datefns, like that, and then we can just use it. And let me show you how to use that. It's really simple. So we can add to the just date, and what are we going to add? Well, we're going to add hours, and let's just add 9 hours for now. So that would mean we are opening at 9 o'clock. Then the const end is going to be equal to add, and then we're going to add to the same thing, to the date the user selected. What are we going to add? Well, let's add hours, and that's going to be 17. So from 9 to 17, and then the const interval is going to be 30. So every 30 minutes in minutes. There we go. Okay. And then here, we want to go from the beginning to the end, and every 30 seconds, we want to push a time into an array, right? Because then we can map over that those times down here. Now to do that, it's quite simple. Let's initialize an empty array. There we go. And then we're just going to do this with a for loop. So for let the iterator is equal to beginning, and then until the iterator is smaller or equal to the end. So until this statement right here is truthy or falsy. Hold up. No, I think until it's falsy. And then I is equal to add I, and then we're going to add, the minutes, which is going to be the interval we've mentioned there. It's going to be a function right here, and then we're just going to push whatever we have in the iterator into the times array, and then return the times. We can check the type, it's a date array. Great, and as I said earlier, we can now invoke this at the top level. So let's say const times is equal to get times and invoke that. Great, so now we've got an times array, like a date array or undefined. And the reason that's great is because now we can map over that right here. So we can say times, if it exists, dot map, because remember it could also be undefined. Then we get a time and an index. And what are we going to return? We are going to return a div. Let's have a div right here with a key of a template string. That template string is going to be time dash and then the index, because the time itself could be duplicate. And then we're going to pass a class name just so it doesn't look completely horrible, of rounded small, background gray 100, padding 2, and that's it. I just want to keep the styling really basic. And then in here, the last thing we're going to have is a button that is of type button. So each time we want to be clickable. And then the on click of that button is going to say set date. So whenever one of the times is selected, we're going to set the date to whatever it was previously. So that's why we have the implicit object return. And then the, let's see, the date time is going to be the time that we're mapping over right here. And the button is going to say something, which is going to be the time that we're mapping over, and we're going to format that. That is also a function that we get from dateFends, by the way. That is not something from path, but from dateFends, and you're going to see what this does in a second. So we can say format, then we want to format the time we're mapping over right here. And then as the second argument, we can pass the format we want. So in our case, that's going to be KK, and then KK, in this case, the hours, and then but the reason we're using KK instead of HH is because this is in 24-hour format, and the hour would be in AM and PM, and then the minutes. There we go. Okay, let's get back to our app, reload this, and we might need to restart the server. Okay, and with this server restart, we can now reload the app. Now let's select the 2nd of January. There we go. And then we've got a bunch of times, right, from 9 to 17, because that's what we configured right here, as the values we're going to use. And then we can click one of the times, and not much will happen when we click them, but we can log out the date.date time, which will initially be null until we select one of the times, right? So we can restart the page and then say, let's select 16. There we go. We are logging that out. So Thursday, January 5th, 16 o'clock as an actual date type, which is exactly what we want. And that also works for every other time that we are mapping over here. Now, this is clipping outside of the screen. Doesn't look good. I'm well aware. Well, that's not the point. The point is that we're getting this as a date, which is great because then we can check, which day of the week is it? Is that within our opening hours? Is that a holiday? And can we serve our products at this time the user has selected? And if so, then we're going to forward them to our menu, which they can select from. That's pretty much everything. Now, one best practice I want you to encourage to do is abstracting these times away into a different file, into a config file. So let's have a let's call it constants. And then the constants, we're going to have a config.ts. And from here, we're just going to export the export const open Let's call it store opening time, which is going to be equal to 9 in hours. Then the export constant store closing time, which is going to be also in hours. Let's just, let's just open for 3 hours in hours. And then the export const interval. Yeah, let's just call it interval, which is 30 in minutes. Okay, and now we want to keep these pretty verbose because the config doesn't really speak for itself. These are very abstract, that's why they are so verbose. And now we can just import them in here, and whenever we want to make changes, we can just change these numbers and do not need to worry about any logic that we're implementing right here. So store opening time until, now it's not 17 anymore, now it's 12, so we're only open 3 hours. Store closing time, and then the interval that we also get from constant slash config. We can remove the comment because we won't need that anymore. That's it. We can save that, go back, and whenever we click a date, we can check which times are available for this date. Now it's from 9 to 12, and whenever we click a date, then it's getting logged to the console, and otherwise it's null, so that allows us to check, has the user selected a date, and if so, we get that back as a date time, so we can handle the checking and the business logic in the next video. Great, that's all I want to share for this video. Thank you very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and let's keep on going with this project in the next video. I'll see you then. Until then, have a good one, and bye bye.